why does God not stop the evil and suffering? We looked in our previous episode of where suffering and evil originate from, and we talked about God being all-powerful, which He is. And so if God is all-powerful, then why does He not remove evil and suffering in our world? Let's talk about that. Let me give you 3 reasons as an answer to this question. Number 1, removing evil removes man's freedom. Now think with me just for a moment. You take God's place and you create a better world, one in which there is no evil and suffering. But in doing so, you must think completely through all the actions you do and the consequences of each of those actions. What I mean is, each time you use force to remove evil, you are removing man's freedom. To prevent all evil and suffering would be to remove all freedom. Now you've done what? You have reduced humans or man to mere robots. They have lost the ability to love or to choose, and that's not how God created man. He created him in His image with the ability to choose. So why does God not stop the evil and suffering in our world? Well, secondly, there is potential for good to come from the evil and suffering. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, Joseph said this. He said, "Look, to his brothers, you meant evil into my life, but God meant it unto good." Joseph is a prime example. His brothers hated him, they envied him, they wanted to kill him, but rather they spared his life and sold him into slavery. He goes to Potiphar's house, he does everything right. Potiphar's wife wants to commit adultery, he says no, no, and for him doing right, he's cast into prison from anywhere for 2 to 12 years. Finally, he's released, he is placed second in charge in Pharaoh's house or kingdom over Egypt, and that's when he meets his brothers and he says that. So all the evil that was inflicted into Joseph's life, and it was a lot of evil and a lot of suffering. You can't minimize that. And you can't minimize how hard it hurt Joseph. But Joseph was able to say at the end, you meant it unto evil, but God meant it unto good. One writer said it this way, all suffering contains at least the opportunity for good, but not everyone actualizes that potential. So how on earth could anything good come from suffering? Let me just give you a couple thoughts under that. First of all, suffering tests and strengthens faith. That's the very nature of faith. How do you know it's real unless it's tested? And so suffering does not destroy faith, it actually refines it. He says only by testing that real faith is discovered. And then secondly, suffering of the cross produced eternal salvation through Jesus Christ. Who would have thought that through a rigged trial, the false accusations, being beaten to the point of death, being unjustly hung on a cross, the physical suffering, the emotional suffering, how that could have produced any good? The disciples, the 11 disciples that were left with Jesus, surely could not see how anything good could come of that, because here they are running, weeping, crying. But God brought about the absolute greatest from the absolute worst. He brought about eternal salvation, what we would say was the most unjust, awful, evil actions ever committed upon a person. God used that to produce the absolute best, and that was eternal salvation as a gift that He offers to everybody. And then thirdly, suffering brings repentance. It's pain and suffering sometimes are what God uses to motivate people to surrender to Him, and He wakes them up, or to bring them to a point of salvation in Jesus Christ. C.S. Lewis was the atheist turned believer, and he said this, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our conscience, but He shouts in our pains. It is His megaphone to rouse a deaf world, and how true that is. So why does God not stop evil and suffering? Well, lastly and thirdly, suffering and evil are compatible with God's love when it is used to bring about a better good. So suffering and evil are compatible with God's love when it is used to bring about a better good. Let me illustrate that for you. When I was younger, I had an ATV accident. I flipped a four-wheeler over and I broke my hip. Now, I went 5 days before I ever realized I had broken my hip. My knee was sore, my leg hurt a little bit, but after my leg started I had to start dragging my leg. I finally went to the doctor. They took an x-ray, sent me to the emergency room, and next thing I know, I have a surgery planned for the next day. Now, when I went into the surgery, my knee was sore. When I came out, I was in excruciating pain. They had cut the side of my thigh about 15 inches. They had cut through some muscle. They had drilled in 3 long screws into my hip, and I woke up, and can I be honest with you, I was screaming like a baby. And nurses came in and they stuck needles in my leg to give me some painkiller. And what I'm saying to you is that surgeon had to inflict more pain. But he inflicted that pain to bring about a better good. What was that better good? That I might be able to walk today. That my leg would be the same length as my other one because my growth plate was not injured or fractured or anything. And so God can allow suffering because sometimes he can uses it. It'll bring about a better good. Just as that surgeon inflicted that pain on me to bring about a better good. So sometimes me and you just need to adjust our view. Rather than asking God, get me out of this suffering, maybe we need to be asking God, what can I get out of this suffering?